back to another episode of The Gridiron Guy, and I apologize in advance for the lackluster uploads in the past week. We should be getting back to 2 to maybe even possibly 3 uploads in the near future. But today, we are going to be breaking down the Colts backfield and, more importantly, Johnathan Taylor and what I expect for his first rookie season in the NFL. And before we get into what I expect, let's break down his background, his collegiate career, and his athletic profile. So, over the last 2 years in college, he was able to run for 2K plus years each year, running with a phenomenal yards per carry of 7.1 and 6.3. An NFL averaged around 4.2 to put that into perspective. He's never missed any time in college due to injury, and his only real college concern was he lost 15 fumbles in 41 collegiate games, which is a lot. He was a feature back at Wisconsin, and he can handle a bell cow role, as he showed, getting a high amount of touches each and every game. And he was drafted second round by the Colts after they selected Michael Pittman at the top of the second round. Now let's get into his athletic profile. And before I go over the numbers, I just want to say, as you're watching the highlights, you can see this dude is an absolute athletic freak. I mean, he reminds me of Saquon Barkley in his build. He's not that tall like Derrick Henry, but he is built, and he has elite speed, running a 4.39, which is 98th percentile. And then his speed score, which incorporates his weight and his height, is 99th percentile, because he weighs 226 and runs a 4.39. Try finding me another guy who does that. You're not going to. He's less agile than a guy like Saquon or McCaffrey, only 71st percentile in agility, but he has home run speed and can run you over. He's a good power back, but he has breakaway speed. I would say a player comparison for him is Zeke. He has that Ezekiel Elliott rookie upside on a fantastic offensive line with a similar build. But before we get into what I expect from Taylor, we have to get into the factors of the backfield he will be joining, and that is Marlon Mack and the rest of the crew. So he's going into a great situation. The Colts have improved at quarterback, which I think everyone would agree. Philip Rivers is an upgrade over Jacoby Brissett. And they have the best offensive line in the league and the best run blocking line in the league. Last year, Marlon Mack, who I don't think is very talented, ran for over 1,000 yards and 8 touchdowns. It's fair to say that he will be incorporated this year because of that. Last year, the Colts as a whole ran for over 2,000 yards and 17 touchdowns and ran for 471 carries. I expect those numbers to be pretty similar. Even with Phil, I have them running 475 times for 2,200 yards and around 20 touchdowns. So now I want to break down Marlon Mack and his floor and ceiling for the upcoming season. So as I mentioned before, last year Marlon Mack ran for 247 carries for 1,091 yards and 8 touchdowns. A very solid fantasy season, having him finish as a top 24 fantasy running back. This year, I think Mack starts out maybe as the lead guy. It's not out of the range of possibilities. He played well last year, and Taylor, he's a rookie. I mean, especially with a shortened offseason, it's hard for rookies to really take over a starting role. So I expect it at the very least to be a 50-50 committee. Probably Taylor may be favored a tad bit more. But I expect Mack to run for around 1,000 yards again this season. I have him for around 200 carries for 900 yards and 6 touchdowns, getting around 40% of the backfield snaps. That would have him finishing as around RB27. And I think that's kind of the ceiling for Marlon Mack. I think 1,000 yards would be tougher for him to reach. It's definitely in the range of possibilities because the Colts have such a good offensive line, and I think that he could be much better if the Colts are winning a lot of games and they continue to run the ball even more. But I think 200 carries, Marlon Mack will finish as a borderline RB2, which is not a bad value whatsoever right now, being drafted in around 9 to 10. Very good value there. But I also think that as the year progresses, Marlon Mack is going to begin to fall off because Johnathan Taylor will begin to take over that feature role as the year progresses. And I could see Marlon Mack being unstartable over the last 6 weeks of the year. But now, let's get to Johnathan Taylor. Actually, first let's break down the rest of the backfield. Nyheim Hines might throw a thorn into this two-headed committee because he may take the pass work. Those 40 receptions or 50 receptions that Hines caught last year might go back to him. Johnathan Taylor could take those. He was an okay receiver in college, never really catching more than 20, 25 passes. But I think Hines will take that receiving workload again, which will definitely take away from some of the upside of a receiving back that Taylor can get that implemented into his game. But who knows? It's hard to project such a opportunity with a rookie. But I expect Hines to be a non-factor in the run game, but stealing some work in the pass game. So let's move to Taylor. I think his floor, and this is his floor, is around 190 carries for around 800 yards and maybe 6 or 7 touchdowns. That is having him finish as a borderline RB2. He's being drafted in the 4th or 5th round. That's not a bad value. One guy that I think from last year closely resembles Johnathan Taylor and what I expect for the outcourse of his fantasy season is Miles Sanders. It's the same type of situation where they both joined a vet who is above average on a good team with a good offensive line. They split early on in the year, but as the year progressed, at least Miles Sanders began to dominate and became a RB1 over the last 5 weeks of the fantasy season, is now being drafted in the top 2 rounds of drafts, and look where Jordan Howard is now. I expect the same thing to happen with Johnathan Taylor and Marlon Mack. I think Taylor will probably be unstartable for maybe some weeks in the beginning of the year, unless he has a really good matchup, say against the Jaguars week 1. It's a good matchup. But as the year progresses, I expect Taylor to be a strong start over the last 8 weeks, every single week. And I projected him for 190 carries and 900 yards, but I could easily see him getting up to 250 carries, even more, if he starts dominating from week 1, because the Colts will not be shy to give him the lead reins if he's not putting the ball on the ground and he's running extremely efficiently behind a great offensive line. Because Johnathan Taylor is far more talented than Marlon Mack. Just watch the highlights. I mean, right now, you see him bursting through holes, running over defenders. He has elite burst and vision, cuts, like everything. He's going to be a phenomenal pro. It's just how quickly can he get acclimated and get the opportunity to dominate in fantasy. And I think Johnathan Taylor's floor is just outside the RB2 range with an upside of finishing close to an RB1 for the season. It just depends on the opportunity and how good the Colts are. If you think the Colts are going to be a dominant team, not dominant, but win 9+ games this year, which they very well could. They have a good roster. And if Philip Rivers plays well, they should win 9+ games. Then the opportunity will be higher because they're going to be running the ball more, and they should be a very good team. But if it's a 50-50 committee, I expect Taylor and Mack to both be around an RB2 finish for the season, low-end RB2s, with Mack starting hotter and finishing colder, and Taylor starting slower and finishing hotter. It all depends on that. Hines shouldn't be much of a factor, but I think currently Taylor's being drafted in the 4th or 5th round. That's a great value because in the end of the day, we are trying to pick league-winning players. And if your team makes the playoffs, just edges it in, and you have him as your 3rd running back, and he's playing as an RB1 at the end of the season, that is a league-winning formula. For example, in one of my drafts, I drafted Derrick Henry and Miles Sanders my first 2 picks. Then I was able to acquire Johnathan Taylor after drafting 2 wide receivers. So at the end of the year, if Taylor's dominating, I have 3 stud running backs and 2 very good wide receivers. That's how you win your league. Johnathan Taylor in the 5th round is an extremely good value, and I highly recommend taking him at that draft position. If you are a new listener, please make sure to subscribe and go back and watch some of my player profiles, which seem to be very in detailed and help a lot of people understand if this player is a player they want on their team at that current value. And as always, for you subscribers and usual listeners, make sure to like and subscribe and leave a comment down below on what you thought of the video.